Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of FinServ Tech Oracles. I'm Johna Johnson, here with my oracular colleague, Jerry Murphy, and we are going to talk about AI regulation, and specifically California SB 1047. But before we jump into that, Jerry, I think you had noted that in a recent Wall Street Journal article, roughly 27% of firms surveyed cited AI regulation as a risk in recent filings.
Right.
Well, let me ask you this: what is the risk that these companies are concerned with?
Well, in a bottom line, it's the cost, of compliance. And the costs come in two forms. One is they may have to actually spend money, right, adhering to whatever dictums the given regulation has in place. The second one is any penalties that they might incur from having to adopt, failing to adopt those regulations. And I guess the third would be, competitive issues are like, if this forces me to do something that I don't want to do, then I become less competitive in the marketplace. So that's their concern, is all those fears of either regulatory fines or just the delay in innovation, which then impacts my ability to compete in the marketplace.
So basically, it's the cost of compliance, having to spend money to ensure that I'm complying.
Right.
The risk of non-compliance, if I screw up somehow in that investment of dollars and I am found not in compliance.
Right.
And then the competitiveness, which is while I'm busy worrying about compliance and regulatory blah, 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 somebody else out there is going to get ahead of me by either cheating, paying less attention to the regulatory requirements, or for some reason they've found a loophole in here and they can forge ahead.
I mean, to me, it's always sort of this generic FUD, right? Fear, uncertainty, doubt. Oh, well, if I can't innovate, then it's going to be bad for my consumers because I'm not going to be able to give them cheaper products, better products, etc. Right? But I mean, to me, they're just seeing it as an impact on their bottom line, as risks to their profitability.
So, Jerry, let's talk about California SB 1047. You and I had a very spirited discussion. It's a very interesting regulation. And what happens next is perhaps not clearly spelled out, and we'll talk about that.
Right.
But first, what can you say about the people who are supporting it, opposing it, and from your perspective, what's in it?
Well, let's first start with what's in it, and it's a 33-page regulation. I should say that it was on the 29th of August. It was passed by the Senate after it had been previously passed by their representative legislature. So it is basically now on the governor's desk. So the reality is it's likely to become law just because both.
Well, before we talk about what's likely to happen, let's talk about what's in it.
Yeah. So basically what is in it is a various bunch of things, but it's basically it's requiring users of technology to make sure that they're protecting consumers from any adverse impacts of technology. So, for example, there's a part where it says, just to extract a part, that they require developers, before beginning to initially train any models covered under this regulation, that they're going to comply with various requirements, including the capability to promptly enact a full shutdown of their model. Right. And then it also says things like they need to prevent systems that, quote, will cause materially enable a critical harm to the company or its users. Now, the problem I have with wording like that is, how do you prove, how do you prove material enable a critical harm? That's the kind of wording that, from my perspective as a tech guy, is like, what is material? And you're saying enable in a critical harm. So it doesn't necessarily do the harm itself, but it allows
it to
something
be
else other than it to create a harm.
Yeah.
So is it because I did a really good job, but somebody using it was too stupid to know how to use the technology right, and therefore they harmed the company, not because the system wasn't tested, wasn't faulty, but the person who used it, then applied it in an inappropriate manner, let's say.
Or someone totally unrelated managed to drive a truck through the loophole kind of thing. So,
Exactly.
Well,
so those are some of the things that, so you can see just at those brief, just for those brief excerpts, you could see how people might say that's pretty onerous. I mean, if I'm going to promptly enact a full shutdown on my system, how do I do that? What exactly is a shutdown? Does that mean I'm shutting down the app? Does that mean the database? Does that mean every system and network are connected to it?
Is a full and material and critical really need clear definitions.
Exactly.
Well, and I think one of the things that's very interesting here is that the fault lines aren't the usual left-wing, right-wing, big companies, small companies. Elon Musk actually came down in favor of it, and he's certainly, right-wing, libertarian, large company. And Nancy Pelosi came down against it, which she's generally considered fairly left-wing. And one of the things that leaps to mind in my mind is that every time regulation happens, regulation almost inevitably favors the incumbents at the expense of the new people. So it's pretty easy to guess that the folks that want the status quo are the people who already have made a significant investment in, or who want the regulation, are the ones that have made a significant investment in AI, who have market-leading capabilities and don't want to be upstaged by entrance into the market.
Yeah, I would say something similar, but much more simply stated. That is, companies are going to oppose it if it's not in their financial interest for it to be there. So different industries may or may not benefit from the results of these technologies. So yeah, if somebody's saying putting this restriction in place is going to prevent me from entering the market and establishing relationships and alliances, etc., they're certainly going to oppose it. But if somebody's already got a huge enmeshed environment, and putting this in is going to prevent the new entrants from subverting their market share, they're certainly going to want it, right?
Exactly. Well, that's I mean, of the companies that do AI, I should be clear. Yeah. Generally, in any industry, if there are people that are already in the space, they want regulation to keep new people from getting into the space.
Yes.
The new people don't want the regulation because they want to get into this space.
Yeah.
So first and foremost, there's a lot of ambiguity of terms here. It contributes to the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that we talked about at the beginning. And it's sort of supported and opposed by a mishmash of people with different agendas.
Right.
Jerry, one thing you and I found really strange was in all the writing about this, it never really tells us what happens next now that it's been sent to Governor Newsom's desk.
Right.
It appears, and maybe you can just sort of share your findings with our listeners, that it appears that what happens next kind of depends on what Newsom does and also on what the legislature does.
Right. And I certainly can't talk to anybody's personal motivations, but let's just stick with the facts, right? The facts are that if the governor vetoes this legislation, the California government law says that the legislature has 60 days to overturn the veto. Now, one is based on how many people already voted for it, both branches voted way more than 2/3 of the people. I think one of the houses, it was literally 90 to 1 or 70 to 1, and the other
it was like 80 to 20 in both houses, actually.
Yeah, so
the
percentage.
Yeah.
So in practical terms, the amount of votes that somebody would have to swing to make it not pass would be really unrealistically high.
Right.
So why would the governor want to veto it?
Yeah.
Well, one is it's to make some political stance, right? You could say, hey, I was against this on moral, philosophical grounds, or more likely politically, that gives me some leverage that when something goes south or people have problems, I can say, hey, I made it very clear that I didn't think we should do this. And now you can see what happened by not listening
or
to me.
more accurately, he may just want to align himself with the people that opposed it, so he can say, "Hey, I gave you your veto; it didn't work, but I gave you yours.
Well,
now
that's
you have
true
to
too.
give me
Yeah,
mine."
I can get my political the people who
Right.
think I'm against them and say, "Hey, I tried. I did what I
tried.
could."
Exactly.
That's true too.
But so basically, what you said earlier, that there were basically three possible outcomes. One is he vetoes it, and he has clear indications of why he vetoed it, so the bill could go back to the assembly, and they
Right.
could decide to make those changes so that it would pass, and
Right.
it would pass, and then it becomes law.
Right.
Second is he vetoes it and doesn't give them any indications. In which case, what happens then?
Well, the legislature has 60 days to act on it. Now it's 60 days, not including breaks. So you look at it, we're coming up within a month, right?
Yeah, because this all has to happen by the end of September.
We're gonna hit. In 60 days, we'll be coming up on Thanksgiving and Christmas. So, in practice, it could really be that the 60 days of the government doesn't happen until January, February of 2025. So next year. But they have 60 days. So if they act on it in 60 days, they would easily override it just because it's already more than 2/3 what they currently have for votes. However, if for some reason they can't get it done in 60 days, then the law is off the books and they have to start over with a brand new, creating a brand new law for signature, next legislative cycle, I suppose.
Yeah, so so basically those are the scenarios. The real question here is, some of you may be listening and going, why do we even care? It's just California. And just a quick reminder, California is either the fifth or the sixth largest economy in the world. If it were its own country, it would be definitely in the top six. And more importantly, as the bill even itself states, California is leading the world in artificial intelligence innovation and research through companies large and small, and as well as our remarkable public and private universities. I don't know that you can quantify that, but philosophically, I think we can all agree that's true.
But they're well known for having a majority of the emerging, technology that comes out of the United States, even most of the world, as you said, a lot of it comes out of there. So even if the only people that ever impacts are people in California, that still is a major impact to technology generally.
Yeah, and the example I always use is Pennsylvania, and I can't remember how many decades ago, but Pennsylvania decided back in either the late 1800s
the 50s, right? Or
was it the 50s? That's what I said.
I think 55 is what.
Yeah, they basically decided. Yeah, they decided that they would have more, more stringent laws about food safety than other states, and it turned out that anyone that made anything had to pass the Pennsylvania level of stringency, because without that they couldn't sell in Pennsylvania, and nobody wanted to sell in just 49 states. So that's California's, in a sense,
and you've
in the
seen
same
California do that with the automotive industry, right? Because even though their laws technically only apply to California, the manufacturers of automobiles don't want to have to make a completely different kind of car in California than they do in the rest of the country to comply with things like their more stringent EPA regs and so on. So they do have an outsized impact on the areas like that.
Yep. So basically, in sum, this is something to really watch, because as goes California, so goes the nation. There have been many attempts to regulate, including the president's executive order in 2023, which is, to my mind, even worse, or worse in the sense of being ambiguous, ambivalent, unclear than SB 1047. But it's a pretty safe bet that if 1047 passes, anything federal is going to look, smell, and feel a lot like 1047, because of the reason you just gave, Jerry, which is nobody can afford to have two totally different, widely disparate regulations. So I guess the message here is pay close attention to what happens in the next 3 months, because Newsom has 30 days to decide whether to veto it, and if he does, then the legislature has another 2 months of time, exclusive of breaks, to decide whether they want to resubmit it. And it could all be done in law. It could be done and dusted by the end of September, or it could drag on into January, and the consequences are pretty significant, particularly for financial firms.
But I do think there are practical things financial services companies can do today, given all this uncertainty and what might happen, right? First is, standards, use them, right? I mean, the more that you can yourself as a company insist on a set of standards, whether it's application program interfaces,
Well,
data
Jerry, I'm going to
standards.
stop you there because
Okay.
there are not a lot of good standards for AI. I know one of your recommendations is also to use zero trust, but there really isn't a good framework that says this is how people can protect AI. So I know there are next steps that financial services firms can take, but I think one of my concerns with all the regulation is that it's gotten ahead of things like standards and things like best practice frameworks so that it's not possible for a company to say, I complied with all the standards and I conformed to all the frameworks, so you shouldn't punish me. Those don't exist yet.
Well, but that's not entirely true, John, because there, even with AI, there's ways that AI models are going to interact with other applications that are using AI that do have standards, right? So you can sit there and certainly push for any vendor that's got AIs to adhere to standardly published, security interfaces.
You can, but there's no guarantee that your AI itself will be protected. So there is no box you can check that says I am doing the right thing with respect to AI risk, and
there's things you can do for AI risk, though, right? I mean, for example, if you're using your own private data to train things, you're far better off than you're training things with public data. You also, when you see results from AI, you still want to have expert looking at this, not people. You can't say, AI is coming and whatever it says is going to be true. No, it's not necessarily going to be true. So when you're using these things, I'm not saying you can't use them, but when they come out, have experts check the results and do a sanity check on it.
Human curation in the loop. Very strongly agree. So basically, your recommendations are use private training data, do stuff internally, steer clear from the public internet, and put human curation in the loop. I'm with you.
Okay. There
All
you go.
sounds good. Thank you very much. And this concludes our FinServ Tech Oracles. We try to get these posted by noon on Tuesdays, so stay tuned for us for next week. Thanks very much.
Hey, take care.